pay transparency is the law now in several provinces in Canada. So, for example, in Ontario, you have to post the salary range when you advertise for a job. I mean, there's some details and logistics and things like that, but in general, that's what it is. This is something that our next guest has been fighting for years. Allison Venditti is the founder of Mums at Work. It is an advocacy group that's been working on many, many things, and she joins us now to talk about the why of this change and what's next. Hello there.
Hi, how are you?
Well, we'll just celebrate the victory. You and I last talked about this in 2022. I looked it up. And so, at least in Ontario, that's a significant milestone. There's things happening in other provinces. Let me first ask, why is pay transparency so important? Why do you believe it's something that was just critical, in particular, for moms?
When I first, years ago, I didn't even know the term pay transparency because when you come up through unions and my family's in forestry, everybody knows what everybody makes. And really moving into corporate was stunning to me that people would apply for a job that they didn't know how much would make.
Right.
That just doesn't make any rational sense. Then when, working in HR, you realize how little power potential employees have when they don't have any information. Like all of the power rests with employers. And that's how the fight started. I just couldn't understand why companies were allowed to get away with this. And especially when we have like cost of living crisis, everything's going up. I'm like, we really need to know before we waste hours of our time applying for jobs, what we're applying for.
What's the gender dynamic? Why does it matter for a female in particular here to know what the range is, which may be less relevant for a male?
The gender pay gap exists. We know it exists primarily because of motherhood. That's why I do Moms at Work. So Claudia Golden won a Nobel Prize in 2023 showcasing that the majority of the gender pay gap was for mothers. So once you have a child, then
Yep.
you will be penalized. And what we know from other studies is that women don't ask, or they don't negotiate, or they feel more uncomfortable. And I was like, this just levels the playing field. That can exist for men too. But what we found was that women, specifically women of color, were not asking about these sorts of things and then suffering because of it.
Yeah. Some of these changes legislatively will prompt some policies and practices that will be different for employers. For example, some employers might be like, oh, we actually don't have salary ranges established. People are all over the map. What kind of work is going to be required behind the scenes as this gets traction nationally?
So to be fair, Ontario employers had a year. They had a year to prepare. It wasn't like this was sprung on them the night
Yeah.
before. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that 95% of employers are small and mid-sized employers.
Yeah.
So, the majority of people who this will impact, you have to have more than 25 employees. So if you have more than 25 employees and you don't have a compensation plan, I'm like, that's on you. I'm like, I'm an HR person.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm like, if you're a big company and, wearing your, big boy or girl pants, like you probably should have a compensation plan. So
Yeah. In
that
addition
will
to
be
a
required.
vacation policy and a harassment policy and something about social media in there and maybe a
All
health and
things.
safety committee.
But what we found was the hesitation was that they'd been so not transparent with current employees that they were concerned how current employees would react. And my thought is, I'm like, if you haven't like kept it neat and tidy in your house and now you're going outside, I'm like, yeah, you are going to have a problem. So that's why we were not pushing for anything shorter than a year because yeah, it's going to take time and you're going to have some hard discussions if you're hiring people for more money than people who already work there.
There's also a real link back to comp for longstanding employees who can see those ranges and say, "Hey, wait a sec! Like I've been here for 20 years. What does that give me? You've got a new hire who could come in higher than me. They have so indifferent to gender. That's a big question for employees in terms of equity, new versus legacy staff.
Right. And that's something that you can't hide now, right? Like that. So that's something that employers, I'm like, benefited from because of lack of transparency. Now you
Yeah.
can't hide from that. Again, that's a them problem.
Now, one of the other big themes that people are talking about everywhere are the
Yeah.
return to office mandates. I am a dad, not a mom, but I am the primary parent to a now 16-year-old. And I have historically done all the doctors and dentists and sick days and all those sorts of things, my life would be completely unworkable with RTO. What are you seeing? What are you saying in order to ensure that Moms at Work has a voice on something that's a really controversial shift?
Yeah, I kind of let loose on the CBC. I don't know if I'm going to be invited back
Well, it's the
there.
CBC. You probably will be.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But like I look at, so everybody for context, I'm like, I've been in HR for 20 years and we know return to office mandates mean two things. One, that you're likely to lose your top talent, and two, you're likely to lose women. So those are the two big accomplishments that happen from return to office. And I have not seen any compelling evidence, excuses, reasons for people to demand people come back to office. I was like, if we're talking like from an environmental standpoint, from a local economy standpoint, I was like, I've been in discussion with people. I'm like, give me the good reasons. And they don't. It's all about culture. It's all about, things. I was like, so like gray interior, massive office buildings are culture. They're not. And I really don't think like I come from Moms at Work, so that's the standpoint. But I'm like, this impacts everybody. This impacts people who are caring for their parents, people who have disabilities, people who just don't want to like and don't work well in offices. So I have found zero compelling evidence,
Yeah.
zero. And I have read all the studies and done all the work in order to justify this.
For those organizations like Credit Canada who have a real value around hybrid remote work, I hope there is a competitive advantage for those organizations to attract these awesome people, and that it isn't just people exiting the workforce. It is that they'll be able to demonstrate agency. There hopefully will be a demand for organizations for whom that is value.
And we're also going to see a massive uptick in people who are self-employed. We're going to see people who are highly talented becoming your biggest competitors, right? That's what's going to happen. So I am giddy to see how that rolls out for
Right.
when your top talent then says, okay, great, I'm going to do it this way and I'm going to do it remotely. I'm going to take your clients.
Yeah. Another area that you've been focused on has been parental leave. And
Yes.
Canada, if you look at it from a global perspective, so I used to live in the US, it's such a different paradigm here. There are many things that I would argue we do right. We don't do
Mhm.
everything right. And there are some real gaps in your view. What
Yeah.
would you say are some of the gaps?
I think that, and I want to give context in the fact that EI was designed like as an employment, not as parental leave, right? Like, so this wasn't designed as a separate parental leave. They kind of smacked it on top of that in the 80s when it came. They're like, this is a good place to put parental leave. Let's do it like that. And it has not kept pace. This is a 35, 40-year-old program that, if you haven't updated your software in 40 years, it's probably not going to be a great fit anymore.
Right. My
So,
Commodore VIC 20 wouldn't be able to process chat
right.
GPT.
Right. And that's what we're seeing. We haven't seen the increases, right? Like they made an 18-month leave for anybody who's not Canadian, not familiar. You have 12 versus 18 months, which was a huge victory, except you got the same amount of money spread over 18 months. So it's like 33% of your pay. And now the terminology is like, oh, it's a rich person leave. Like only people who could survive on 33% of their salary are going to be taking this leave, but it is protected. The other thing that we've already done changes for is the rights weren't the same for adoptive parents as they were for, other
Biological
parents.
parents?
Yeah, I was like, that seems unnecessary. We have legislation going through the federal government at this point that protects anybody who loses a child on parental leave. They used to get kicked off and been put on sick leave. So you would have to call every 2 weeks and explain why you were still on sick leave, which is just re-traumatizing people. So that Evans law is going through. What we've decided instead of trying to re-overhaul EI is I'm like, we're going to take it piece by piece. This is a really big program that if we tried to do it all, it would take forever. And so we're just trying to update it. We're really focused on the payments increasing. And we're really focused on people who are having twins or triplets. Like they only have one, shot at one group of money. And I'm like, but you have two kids. So that needs to change too.
Right. Uh, where do you feel like your advocacy has the most momentum? So is it shaking hands and kissing babies with politicians? Is it rallying employers? Is it the general public? How are men acting as allies for women at work, but for moms at work?
I do zero meetings with politicians.
Huh.
Zero. I have no interest in someone whose job is going to be 36 months and then they're going to be gone because I'm not going to be gone in 36 months. So I spend a lot of time with staffers, people who are young and keen and want to make change and are like joining this and doing the work. Moms at Work is very much a public discussion. So when we start talking about pay transparency, I'm like, these are normalizing and educating discussions. And what I despise about advocacy is having people assume that regular people understand what pay transparency is. Like, why would anybody know what that is? And why would you treat them badly because they don't know what that is instead of trying to educate people and talking about the impact that it has on them? Humans are inherently selfish, right? We want the best things for us. We don't really care what's happening three streets over. So anything that we talk about at Moms at Work to anybody, to everybody, is about how this impacts you, how this would impact, the people around you, how it would impact your loved ones, and then like how we want to make change. And it's really by normalizing that discussion. So I have a very different take on advocacy because I feel it's entirely unfair to leave a giant swaths of the population out of the conversation.
Hmm. Speaking of the large swath of the population,
Mhm.
men, husbands who
Yep.
have moms at work, they sleep in the same bed as many of these moms who are at work. What's the call to action for the spouses of?
I think that our biggest fans are husbands.
Right.
Right? So Moms at Work works to make sure that women are paid more money, get better jobs, building community. And I was like, and anybody who has a problem with that, I was like, that's a you issue. So I think that there's a lot of learning that has gone on along because, men, same as women, were not familiar with pay transparency. We're learning as they go along. Their wives get the newsletter, you have a talk at home. So I think having the discussions, like as men, is equally as important. But I will say, I'm like, I deeply believe that parental leave is one of the strongest things that we can do to support like working families. I think that offering men and normalizing taking parental leave. So it's not just offering it, it's
Yeah.
taking it and having people in leadership positions do that means way more than you think it does. Taking vacation unapologetically, talking about taking your kids to hockey, talk about the things that you're doing makes it better and normal for people who are younger and maybe in junior positions. They see that Bruce does it and they're like, okay,
Yeah.
cool. In this organization, we can do that. And for men to be doing that is powerful.
When you look ahead, I'm thinking 5 to 10 years. Not
Yep.
super long, but not tomorrow. What are some of the big things, some big opportunities, some big policy objectives that we aren't currently talking all that much about?
We need to have a very real and hard conversation and remarket universal basic income. I think that I don't know why we have parental leave and EI and all of these different programs that cost a ton of money to administer. There's all these rules, they're really hard. Ireland, other countries have rolled out, even Ontario's rolled out universal basic income. It's a
Ontario
bad,
was a test, though, right?
yeah, they
Was
had
a
a test.
test that,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
was
this test.
aborted in the end, or,
Yeah.
or they didn't continue.
Highly successful and then cut it, right? Like, because that's how we roll here in Ontario. We just do things that are super successful but don't end up doing them. And it has a marketing problem, right? Like the same way that my grandfather called it the dole all the time, right? Like it just has a marketing problem. And I think that if we are facing an aging population crisis that's going to demand care, if we're trying to have people to have more children, if we're trying to make Ontario and Canada a better place to live, I'm like, universal basic income is going to provide that buffer, right? So that's the conversation that I think most advocacy organizations should be working together to have a very frank talk about why this isn't happening now. And if we're talking about like government cuts and all the things, I'm like, this is the biggest money saver in terms of rolling out a program that can hit all of these markers.
Mm. One last question. How
Sure.
would you characterize the time in which we are in today that is distinct from the time we would have been in, say, 5 years ago? And what I would say, where my question comes from, is south of the border, huge DEI backlash.
Mhm.
People forget a little bit about the Me Too movement. There are real concerns about the economy, and employees can't be perhaps quite so choosy about where they work, can't be quite so demanding. They feel pressure to return to office because they're not sure that they'll be able to get a job if they depart. How would you say, what sort of world do you see we're in today?
As someone who studied history and spent a ton of time with my grandparents and whatever, and I was like, this is another one. We said the same things about COVID. We said the same things about World War II, about Vietnam, about like all of these things. Like, look, there's been a ton of awful, awful world leaders, right? Like, it's just that it's so close to Canada that we're feeling it. And I was like, hey, have you had a look around the globe at some of these other winners who are going strong here? So I don't want to minimize the fact that we are having a lot of issues. But for women, the world has changed substantially since the 1970s. And anytime women have made gains, there's been pushback,
Hmm.
right? Any single time. So I was like, I think that expecting, big change is going to cause big pushback. I am not a I'm not a person who naturally goes hopeless. I'm an extremely hopeful person. It's the only reason advocacy exists is because we have
Hmm.
to believe that working together is going to make this better. So that's my answer. I'm like, you're never going to get, oh my gosh, the world is ending. This is horrible from me
Yeah.
because that's not how I roll. I think we have a lot of opportunities to do a lot of really cool things as long as we're willing to do them together. And I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest takeaway is I'm like,
Great.
this fractional, like this fractioning. And I was like, we agree on way more things than we disagree on.
Sure. Thank you for your passion and your resilience as you continue to push these. That geez, bottle up that passion and resilience, and I don't know, sell it at Sephora, something like that.
There you go.
Allison, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Allison Venditti is the founder of Moms at Work. We asked her to come on to talk about pay transparency because it's in the news these days, but also some of the other big things that are relevant for women in the workplace.